Daniel Boyd's rental car halted at the gate, again. Red text blinked, access denied. Third time this week. He leaned back in the driver's seat, exhaled slowly, and stared through the windshield at the familiar keypad mounted beside the cedar-paneled entrance. It wasn't even 7 a.m., and already the gate had decided he wasn't welcome. Again. He reached over and tapped the code in one more time, 6 digits Frank had scribbled onto a note stuck to the dashboard. Same result. Access denied. The message pulsed like a warning light on an old submarine. Frank stood a few yards away near the mailbox, bundled in his thick canvas jacket, sipping coffee from a dented silver thermos that looked like it had been through 2 wars. He didn't seem surprised. Just raised one eyebrow as Daniel rolled down the window. Guess it's not a glitch, Daniel muttered. Frank took another sip. That gate knows who it answers to. Just not us anymore. Daniel let out a dry laugh, more air than sound. This is ridiculous. I was just here 2 days ago. You were lucky then. Might want to wait till after 9. HOA resets the protocols in the mornings, or so they claim. And we just take that. Daniel opened the door, the cold air rushing in. You helped design that gate. Don't we have an override? Frank shrugged. The override was removed when they upgraded to the smart system. Daniel stepped out and looked around. The community was quiet, rows of well-kept ranch homes lined the gentle slope, leaves blanketing driveways like patchwork quilts. A light frost clung to mailbox flags. He glanced toward Mrs. Cromwell's place. Her curtains were drawn, as usual, but he could feel her watching. She always seemed to know more than she let on. Back inside the house, the air smelled faintly of cedar and old paperback glue. Daniel peeled off his jacket and rubbed his hands, chilled even through gloves. On the kitchen counter sat a pile of unopened mail, most of it from the HOA. He picked one at random and slid it open. Access privileges subject to adjustment for the safety and uniformity of the community, he read aloud. What does that even mean? Frank looked over his reading glasses. Means they think power looks better behind a keypad. Daniel set the envelope down. You hungry? I was thinking of swinging by Dottie's. Best thing about HOA meetings is they can't stop you from eating. Within half an hour, they were seated at their usual booth by the window at Dottie's diner. A ceiling fan creaked overhead, and the scent of burned toast and sausage hung in the air like morning fog. The waitress, a tall woman named Renee with a red ponytail and perpetual smirk, dropped 2 mugs without asking. Morning, Mr. Black refill, she said, topping off Frank's cup with practiced aim. And you must be the prodigal son. Daniel grinned. Depends how prodigal you mean. Renee winked and moved on, already hollering an order to the cook. Frank stirred his coffee, no cream, no sugar, the way he always had. He stared out the window for a long moment before speaking. I helped install that system back in '08. Wasn't supposed to be fancy. Just a keypad and a rolling gate. Simple, straightforward. Access logs, nothing more. Daniel leaned in. So when did it become this fortress? Couple years after I retired from the board. They brought in consultants, said we needed to future-proof the infrastructure. Frank frowned. Turns out future-proof means take control away from people who paid for it. After breakfast, they headed back. Daniel ducked into the garage, flipping on the overhead light. Dust shimmered in the beam, and the smell of oil and cold concrete seeped into his jacket. In the corner sat a rusted metal cabinet with a sticker that read, Boyd Engineering. Inside, cables, tools, and, tucked behind a shelf, an old router box, blinking faintly. He connected his laptop and began scanning. A few minutes later, he found what he didn't expect, access logs rewritten. Not overwritten, rewritten. Time stamps had been shifted. Names anonymized. And then, a note in the code header, privileged override, admin layer 3. Pop, he called, voice echoing. Frank appeared at the doorway, wiping his hands on a cloth. You find something? Daniel turned the laptop toward him. Yeah. Someone's been inside the system. Recently. Frank stepped closer, reading the screen with squinted eyes. That's not part of the original framework. No, Daniel said, voice hardening. It's not. This isn't some bug. It's not a malfunction. He turned to face his father fully. Dad, someone's blocking us on purpose. Frank only took a slow sip from his thermos, then gave the faintest shrug. Then I guess it's time we remind them who built the gate. At the HOA meeting, the coffee was weak, the air tense, and the agenda suspiciously short. Daniel took the last available seat in the third row, the kind of metal chair that reminded him of school assemblies and county fairs. The room smelled faintly of carpet cleaner and burned decaf. A stack of printed agendas sat abandoned on a folding table by the entrance, the top sheet fluttering whenever someone opened the door. Frank sat beside him, arms crossed, wearing his old bomber jacket, the one with a worn patch from an air show in '92. From the front of the room, Karen McDowell cleared her throat and adjusted the small mic clip to her collar. She smiled, the kind of smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, then launched into a list of updates so smoothly rehearsed they might have been pre-recorded. As part of our seasonal adjustments, she began, we've implemented a minor update to our access protocols. This ensures enhanced safety and seamless gate operation, especially during peak hours. Daniel glanced sideways at his father. Frank didn't look up, but muttered just loud enough for his son to hear, if Karen's talking too fast, it means she's hiding something. Daniel's hand shot up. Karen hesitated, mid-sentence, but gestured politely. Yes. Mr. Boyd? Would you mind clarifying, Daniel said evenly, if these minor updates include removing residents from the access list without informing them? Karen's smile twitched. Adjustments are made automatically based on usage trends and compliance reviews. All in the interest of community safety. But were people told? He asked again, firmer this time. Because I haven't received anything. And I've been locked out. 3 times. Murmurs flickered across the room like sparks catching dry grass. A man near the back nodded quietly. Beside him, a young woman with a stroller whispered to her neighbor. Karen stepped back from the podium, glancing toward Carl Duffy, the HOA treasurer. Carl hunched slightly, fiddling with the cap of a ballpoint pen. He offered no help. Frank stood, the scrape of his chair sharp in the quiet room. I'd like to request access to the system logs, he said calmly. I helped install the first iteration of that gate. It was always meant to be transparent, not selective. Karen raised both hands. Mr. Boyd, as I'm sure you understand, our current system is under vendor protection and subject to administrative oversight. Unauthorized audits could lead to breach of service agreements. So it's proprietary now? Frank asked. Who signed off on that? She hesitated. The board voted on it last year. It was in the November minutes. A man in the second row leaned toward his wife. I don't remember any vote, he whispered. Daniel scanned the room. Kyle McDowell stood silently near the far corner, arms folded, eyes fixed on the floor. His hoodie bore the logo of the local landscaping crew. He looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Frank looked straight at Kyle. Son, he said, not unkindly, you're listed as groundskeeping staff. You ever been asked to update system logs or gate access lists? Karen spoke before Kyle could respond. Mr. McDowell is not on the tech team. Let's not drag him into this. Her tone was sharp now, the sugar peeling off. A beat passed. Then someone behind Daniel whispered, she's been tweaking the gate since last fall. First time I noticed was after Halloween, my niece couldn't get in to visit. Karen clapped her hands gently, the sound too loud in the stillness. Let's stay on track, please. I believe we veered off from the intended agenda. Frank didn't sit down. This is the agenda. Carl cleared his throat, finally speaking. Maybe we should table this discussion and revisit after the next quarterly report. Karen nodded briskly. Good idea. Due to the tension in the room and some misinformation circulating, I'm calling the meeting to a close. Before anyone could object, she stepped down from the podium and unplugged the mic. Chairs scraped again. A few people stood awkwardly, unsure whether to applaud, protest, or simply leave. Frank and Daniel remained seated for a moment longer. The crowd thinned. Some folks approached each other in quiet pairs. The couple with the stroller whispered hurriedly and exited. Carl collected his papers with clumsy speed, not meeting anyone's gaze. Karen disappeared through the side door, heels clicking like punctuation. Daniel bent down to pick up his coat when he noticed something under the empty chair ahead. A single sheet of paper, slightly crumpled, typed in 12-point Arial with the HOA's official logo at the top. Meeting minutes, October 2022. He turned it over and read the last line. The name signed in pen beneath the approval stamp was unmistakable. Frank took the page, eyebrows rising slowly as he scanned the bottom. It was signed by Kyle McDowell. From before he'd even been hired officially. Between a can of WD-40 and a 1980s multimeter, Frank found his old gate schematics rolled in a cardboard tube. He pulled the tube out with a grunt, blowing off a puff of dust that danced in the yellow flicker of the garage's overhead light. It was colder inside than out, the kind of cold that lived in cement floors and uninsulated walls. The smell of motor oil and old metal hung in the air, joined by something faintly citrusy. Frank's garage always carried a whiff of the orange cleaner he swore by. Daniel leaned on the workbench nearby, arms crossed. You sure you want to unroll that? Paper that old might qualify as historic. Frank ignored him, slipping the rubber band off carefully and spreading the yellowing sheet over the table. His reading glasses swung from the string around his neck as he lowered them onto his nose. There, he murmured, tapping near the bottom corner. Original controller logic. Access list matrix. No selective override. Daniel leaned closer. So this layer they added, it wasn't part of your blueprint. Not unless I had a time machine, Frank said, running a finger along a series of block diagrams. That gate used to treat everyone the same. Only difference was a master code, and that stayed with the board chair. No filters, no behavior-based locks. Daniel opened his laptop and connected to the diagnostics node he'd wired in last week. His fingers moved quickly across the keyboard. A line of code blinked, then unfolded like a zipper. There it was again, selective access layer, buried under security wrappers. Frank frowned. We never called it that. Not in any iteration. A soft ping signaled the start of a video call. Daniel turned the screen toward his father just as Marta Tran's face filled the frame. Her apartment behind her was softly lit, bookshelves casting long shadows across a wall of pinned documents. Mr. Boyd, she said with a nod, or Frank, if I may. Frank smiled faintly. You may. Just don't call me old man, and we'll be fine. Marta's lips curled slightly. You asked me to review what your son sent over last night. This module, the one labeled Selective Access, wasn't part of the original contract or any county-reviewed infrastructure plan. It's unlicensed code, likely inserted post-deployment. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Is it legal? She tilted her head. That's a tricky word. Let's say, it's undocumented, lacks consent, and constitutes functional encroachment of access rights. Frank scratched the back of his head. Thought so. Also, Marta added, clicking through a PDF on her end, if it affects emergency access or causes disruption during medical need, you may have grounds for a cease and desist, pending evidence of recurring harm. Daniel nodded. We've got records of 3 lockouts, including ours. A knock interrupted them. Frank stood and opened the side door to reveal Mr. Carter, bundled in flannel and holding a rusted wrench in one hand. Hope I'm not interrupting, he said. Water heaters groaning again. Wondered if you had a spare coupler lying around. Frank motioned him in. Bottom shelf, blue crate. Carter stepped inside and paused. His eyes landed on the schematics, then on Daniel's screen. Back to fixing gates, are we? He asked. Daniel glanced at Frank. Trying to understand why they stopped working right. Carter let out a slow breath. Thought it was just me. A while back, they wouldn't let me out. Gate stayed closed even when I buzzed twice. Happened the night I had to drive my wife to urgent care. Daniel's fingers froze over the keyboard. I figured it was a glitch, Carter went on. Didn't want to make waves. Frank's voice was quieter than usual. It's not a glitch. He turned back to the schematics, rolled them up slowly, then took a small black USB drive from his toolbox and plugged it into the controller panel. A minute later, the old access interface loaded, crude, blocky, but familiar. He typed a line of code, then hit enter. The garage door clicked, then rose in a steady hum. Daniel blinked. You patched it? Frank nodded. Rolled it back to 2010 firmware. No override layer. Just user codes. They stood in silence as the morning light spilled into the garage, silver and cold. Daniel created a folder on his desktop. He typed its name slowly, Phase 1, Justification. Inside it, he dropped the schematic scan, the access logs, and a screen grab of Marta's legal summary. Carter turned to leave but paused at the threshold. You boys keep digging. Something's been off for a while now. I just didn't think anyone would say it out loud. When he was gone, Daniel leaned against the workbench, watching the garage door settle back down. Kyle passed by on the sidewalk outside, headphones in, hood up. He looked inside briefly, met Daniel's gaze, then turned away. Daniel opened a fresh notepad window. This goes deeper than just us. Frank adjusted his glasses again, hands steady now. No more excuses. No more guessing. He tapped the controller box lightly, like sealing something in place. Not a glitch, he said. Not a mistake. Before the coffee even brewed, Silver Pines woke up to a printed flyer on every doorstep, Resident Gate Audit, Saturday at 9 a.m. Open to all. They were simple sheets, black ink on white paper, cut clean, tucked under doormats or folded into mailbox flags. No logos, no dramatic fonts. Just a line of text at the bottom, prepared by concerned residents, F. Boyd, D. Boyd, M. Tran. By 8:45, folding chairs scraped gently across the lodge floor. The old projector whined its way to life in the corner while someone fussed with the extension cord. Outside, the frost hadn't yet lifted, and fog clung to the glass like breath held too long. Inside, the air buzzed with a quiet hum, half curiosity, half discomfort. A paper sign had been taped near the entrance, today's presenter, Frank Boyd, system founder. The system founder part was underlined, maybe by accident, maybe not. Frank stood behind a long plastic table that had served as everything from bake sale counter to raffle hub over the years. Today, it held a laptop, a chipped thermos, and a red manila folder marked, Gate Logs, Non-Confidential. Daniel stood to one side, already queuing up the first slide. Marta sat nearby in a navy blazer and soft-soled heels, flipping through her notes. Her glasses caught the projector's flicker with each turn of the page. Frank cleared his throat, not to gain attention, he already had it, but to steady his voice. Morning, folks. I see some familiar faces here. I appreciate that. Marta offered a slight nod, keeping her arms folded gently, calmly. Behind her, Mrs. Cromwell leaned forward in her chair, clutching a thermos wrapped in a knitted cozy. Next to her, Mr. Carter adjusted his hearing aid. Near the back, a young man in a hoodie sipped from a paper cup, watching. Frank tapped the screen. The first slide showed a grainy image, the original blueprint from 2008. This is what we built, he said. No filter, no override. Just a code and a lock. He pointed to the screen. And here's what's running now. The image flipped to a blocky flowchart, labeled Selective Access Layer, installed 2021. This wasn't voted on. It wasn't disclosed. Marta stood next. The HOA's charter allows for infrastructure maintenance. It does not allow unilateral system alterations that restrict resident rights, especially not without documentation. Daniel stepped up. He clicked forward to a chart, log entries with rows highlighted in red. These are access denials. 38 instances. Some of you here today are on this list. A rustle moved through the room. A woman in the third row raised her hand. I couldn't pick up my grandson last month. The gate said error. I thought it was my code. A man near the side wall added, we thought ours expired. My wife called Karen, never heard back. Frank gestured toward the folder. It wasn't your code. The system was set to block. Based on internal flags we never authorized. The room went still. Then the door creaked open. Karen McDowell walked in like she'd planned to be late. Her coat was buttoned high, hair pinned tighter than usual. She nodded at no one, walking slowly to a chair near the aisle and sitting without a word. The last slide still glowed faintly behind Frank. Access rights are not a privilege. Karen crossed her legs, calmly. I hope we're not forgetting that unauthorized access to HOA systems is itself a violation. Marta met her gaze evenly. No access was taken. Diagnostics were observed from within the original architecture. By one of its designers. Karen smiled thinly. Convenient. Kyle stood at the back, near the snack table. He hadn't moved much since arriving, arms folded, face unreadable. Daniel noticed him shifting now, slowly straightening. Karen's voice sharpened. If you want transparency, the board will gladly arrange a formal review. Then why did you use my account, Mom? Heads turned. Kyle didn't shout. He didn't even raise his voice. He simply stepped forward, one foot scuffing slightly on the old tile. Karen's posture froze. Kyle continued, gaze fixed on her now. Why is my name on access logs from 2 months before I even had a login? A gasp rose, then died in the air. Karen turned slightly, her mouth parting. Kyle, this is neither the place nor. You logged changes under my name, he said. I saw the report. Daniel showed me the audit trace. It's my name on those filters. But I wasn't even on payroll yet. Marta placed her folder on the table quietly, like she was setting down a final piece on a jigsaw. Frank remained silent, only watching. Karen reached down, picked up a copy of the meeting agenda, one that had somehow migrated to her chair. She stared at the paper like it had personally betrayed her. Then, with slow fingers, she folded the page in half and pinched the edge. You have no idea what you're starting. The attic always creaked in November, but tonight, Kyle's heart creaked louder. The wind pressed against the roof in slow, restless sighs. Kyle sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the USB drive plugged into his laptop. The tiny blue light blinked like a silent question. His room smelled of old laundry, paperbacks, and whatever lived inside energy drinks. On his desk, a photo of his younger self and Karen, back when smiles came easy, sat slightly askew. He didn't straighten it. He clicked into the directory and watched as line after line of system logs scrolled across the screen. The folder was labeled _archive01_system root. Timestamps dated back nearly 8 months. Names, codes, entry attempts. But then, interspersed, tags like manual.override_kmcd and remote_clear_log_k.m. He double-checked the root path. These weren't copies. They were extraction snapshots, ones he'd pulled down 6 months ago during a training session, then forgotten. Or maybe ignored. A soft knock on his window startled him. He peered through the curtain. Daniel stood outside, hands in his jacket pockets, breath fogging under the porch light. Kyle opened the door before he could knock again. Got something? Daniel asked. Kyle hesitated, then handed over the drive. I saved this back in May. Thought I'd get extra credit, or maybe impress someone. I don't know. Daniel took it gently. You just did. In Frank's garage, the space was lit only by the warm hum of a desk lamp and the crackle of a small tabletop radio. The Eagles played low in the background. Frank was bent over his workbench when they came in, Screwdriver in one hand, a circuit board in the other. Daniel dropped the USB into a nearby laptop and pulled up the contents. Frank set down the screwdriver and moved beside him. Marta joined them via video chat, her face framed by evening shadows and the glint of legal documents stacked behind her. Her voice, though low, cut through the room like a gavel. "These logs confirm it," she said. Karen's account manually applied filters to specific resident codes, most notably during HOA voting windows or maintenance disputes. Kyle stood off to the side, chewing at the edge of his thumbnail. Frank adjusted his glasses. "Cross-reference those entries with our own log exports." Daniel did. Two side-by-side windows lit the screen. One showed system-level input entries, the other showed board meeting dates. "They match," he said. "Lockouts occur within 24 hours of complaints." Marta leaned closer. "Frank, with your status as system originator and Daniel's access logs, we can file an injunction. Tonight." Frank didn't answer immediately. He flipped open the red folder they'd started 2 nights ago, Phase 1, Justification. Inside were timestamps, witness notes, and the HOA's own bylaws, printed and underlined. Kyle cleared his throat. "There's more." He reached into his bag and handed over a printed email. "I wasn't supposed to see this. It came through my admin portal by mistake." Frank read aloud. "Given the continued demands from certain residents, I propose a maintenance buffer surcharge. This will help offset board member hours. Discretionary, of course. Karen M." Daniel blinked. "She's paying the board. Calling it buffer." Marta's voice tightened. "If this was never disclosed, that's a direct conflict of interest. It strengthens our case. Possibly even moves it toward criminal review, depending on fund routing." Kyle set down a final slip of paper. A handwritten note. Short. Uneven. "They never meant for me to see this." Frank read the line twice, then carefully placed it atop the rest of the folder. He took out a pen from the old cup next to his toolbox. It still smelled faintly of pine sap and brass polish. Without a word, he signed the final page of the request. Daniel watched his father lower the pen. The radio clicked off, ending mid-chorus. For a moment, the room was silent except for the whisper of old hinges. Daniel then leaned in, voice low. "They won't see this coming. But they'll feel it." The community lodge had never been this full, not even at last year's chili cook-off. Rows of metal chairs had been added hastily, forming tight aisles where knees bumped and elbows knocked. Jackets were draped over chairbacks. Steam curled from paper cups filled at the percolator near the door. A sign-in sheet passed slowly from hand to hand, as though no one wanted to be first to sign it but no one wanted to be last either. Daniel adjusted the old wired mic, its cord frayed and patched with duct tape. The sound squealed once before settling. Frank stood beside him, holding a manila folder thick with evidence. Marta sat just behind them, her blazer buttoned neatly, a red folder balanced on her lap like a gavel waiting to fall. Frank stepped forward. "We're not here to fight," he began, voice steady, "and we're not here to split this neighborhood down the middle. We're here to clear the fog." A few heads nodded. Mrs. Cromwell clutched her thermos. Mr. Carter folded his arms but leaned forward. Sam and Laura, parents of 2 toddlers, shared a glance, unreadable but focused. Near the back, Sandra Hayes scribbled quietly into a small leather notebook, a press badge clipped neatly to her collar. Marta rose and opened her folder. She didn't raise her voice, but the silence in the room handed it weight. "What you're about to see," she said, "are access logs, expenditure reports, and emails related to gate controls and HOA fund dispersals over the last 18 months. Daniel clicked the projector remote. The first slide blinked onto the old pull-down screen, a grid of names, dates, times. Yellow rose glowed faintly. "These entries," he said, "represent denied access. Most within 24 hours of resident complaints." Marta turned the page. "This email," she continued, holding up a printout, proposes a discretionary surcharge labeled maintenance buffer. It was never disclosed, nor was it authorized under the charter. The funds were directed into accounts with limited oversight. Frank held up a second document. This system here, he said, tapping the diagram, was designed to serve everyone equally. These changes weren't bugs. They were decisions. All eyes turned as Kyle stood slowly near the side wall. My account, he said, was used to authorize override entries before I was officially hired. The dates don't lie. And I didn't know, at first. But I do now. He didn't look at his mother when he said it. But he didn't have to. Karen sat in the second row, hands folded tightly in her lap. She hadn't spoken. Not yet. Sandra raised her hand. Ms. McDowell, she asked, pen poised, given these claims, are you planning to resign? Karen's smile was faint but fixed. I believe this board has acted in the community's best interest. But the logs show otherwise, Marta said, still gentle. And the board didn't vote on these changes. The room didn't erupt. It shifted. People leaned back, glanced at each other. Murmurs moved like undercurrent, soft but undeniable. Then Mr. Carter raised his hand. I move that we hold a vote, he said. For a new board. Tonight. Another voice echoed him. Seconded. Frank looked toward Marta, who simply nodded and closed her folder with a quiet, conclusive snap. Not triumphant, just finished. Hands went up. One after another. Even Mrs. Cromwell, after a beat, raised hers with a small, resigned sigh. Sandra's pen moved quickly across the page. Karen didn't stop them. She stood slowly, reached into her bag, and pulled out a slim plastic card. She walked to the table where the ballots were being counted, set the card down gently. You've made your choice, she said, her voice low. Good luck. By Monday, the HOA gate opened without a glitch, for everyone. No denials. No pings. Just quiet clicks and colder air. The early November wind carried a crispness that hinted at snow. Frost crept along the curb edges and silvered the mailbox flags. At the end of the lane, the gate eased open for a minivan with a child in the backseat waving a mittened hand through a cracked window. No hesitation. No beeps. Just the clean hum of metal doing what it was supposed to do. Frank stood beside the signal box with the panel removed. His fingers, though slower than they once were, moved confidently along the circuit board, nudging a new chip into place. A pair of reading glasses perched on the edge of his nose. Next to him, Kyle held the casing steady, the cold reddening his knuckles. You ever think you'd be back here? Frank asked, not looking up. Kyle shook his head. Not like this. Frank gave a small grunt of approval and flipped a switch. The LED blinked green. At the lodge, Daniel finished taping a paper to the announcement board, printed in bold, center-aligned. As of today, all residents have the right to request system audits. No approval required. Below it, a stack of carbon copy request forms sat in a tray marked Take 1. Inside Dottie's, the air was warmer, scented with maple and overcooked eggs. Every booth was taken. Frank nodded at a few familiar faces as he walked past, Mr. Carter reading the newspaper, Mrs. Cromwell sipping tea with a sprig of mint in it, a young couple whispering over a shared muffin. Daniel slid into the booth across from his father and handed him a folded letter. Final version of the new charter, he said. Marta sent it this morning. Frank opened it slowly. She gone already? She said she's earned a few quiet mornings. He smiled. Left you a note. Said, justice doesn't always wear a robe. Frank chuckled. Smart woman. They read in silence for a while. The new charter laid out guidelines in plain language, public oversight, shared codes, term limits for board members. Nothing fancy. Just fair. Across the cafe, Kyle approached Mr. Carter's booth. He shifted awkwardly, rubbing his hands on his jeans. Mr. Carter, he said, voice low, I wanted to say I'm sorry. For what happened with the gate? For what I didn't say sooner. Carter folded his newspaper. Took guts to show up Saturday. Takes more to show up today. Kyle nodded once. I'm trying. Carter extended a hand. Then keep trying. We'll be watching, but kindly. At the lodge that evening, a handful of residents gathered again. No folding chairs this time, just a circle, cups of cider, and a cardboard box with "Vote" scrawled in black marker. Frank didn't speak when the final count was called. He just gave a slight nod as every hand, every single one, voted to adopt the new charter. Outside, Mrs. Cromwell stepped beside him, gloved hands folded over a small stack of invitations. We're putting together a thanks-for-giving supper, she said. Next Thursday. You and your son are expected. No excuses. Frank looked at her, then at the fluttering leaves gathering by the curb. Wouldn't miss it. Near the gate, Daniel reached into the back of his truck and pulled out a small wooden sign. The words had been etched by hand, the letters painted white. He held it up. Respect opens all gates. Frank smiled at the grain of the wood, at the slight curve of the lettering. The new welcome sign stood where the HOA's old camera pole had been, cedar wood, hand-carved, and bathed in soft November light. Its grain glowed in the fading sun, carved letters catching just enough shadow to read clearly from a distance, "Respect opens all gates." There were no ribbons. No speeches. Just the quiet of neighbors standing in shared silence, and Frank's hand resting briefly on the top edge of the post. Leaves scattered lightly across the lawn as the wind turned cooler. Beyond the open gate, the lodge had been transformed, wooden tables pushed together under a string of wind lanterns, warm dishes steaming under foil, laughter drifting over the lake like chimney smoke. Daniel carried 2 chairs toward the edge of the dock where the grass dipped low. Kyle passed by with a tray of cider cups, nodding at people as he went. This time, his eyes didn't dart down. He looked at them, really looked, and when Sam offered a hand to help him unload, Kyle accepted. Mabel Carter stood near the dessert table, wrapped in a brown shawl. She held up a slice of pumpkin bread and cleared her throat gently. Conversations around her softened. I remember, she said, voice even, when I asked if I could fix my porch roof. Just a few shingles. The HOA said it disrupted architectural harmony. She smiled without bitterness. Now. They helped me order the lumber. The crowd chuckled, a few nodding in quiet recognition. Mabel raised her glass. To roofs patched, fences mended, and neighbors remembered. Applause followed. Light. Honest. A small girl tugged at her father's sleeve. Can we sing the lake song now? Sam laughed and motioned to his wife, Laura, who pulled out a guitar. They started slow, a folk tune passed down from someone's grandfather, and the little one joined in, clapping off beat. People followed, scattered voices at first, then steadier, fuller. Later, near the fire pit, Kyle stood beside the announcement board and read aloud from a piece of paper. To the residents of Silver Pines, I made mistakes. I stayed silent when I should have spoken, and I watched as decisions were made in my name. I'm sorry. This community deserves better. I'll work to be part of it. Kyle McDowell. No one clapped. No one had to. The acceptance was in the way Mr. Carter offered him another cider, in the way Mrs. Cromwell passed him a plate of roasted chicken like it was always meant for him. Daniel returned from the lodge with a folder tucked under his arm. He stepped onto the center stone of the patio where a few newer residents had gathered. They asked if I'd serve as interim chair, he said. But I think we've all heard enough from one person at a time. He looked out across the group. Let's not replace one voice with another. Let's all speak. Heads nodded. The page in his hand trembled slightly in the breeze. He tucked it into his jacket. After the candles were lit and leftovers packed, Frank found an envelope under his coat. No name on the front, just a folded corner. Inside, a handwritten note in looping script. I never meant to become what I fought. But I did. Karen. He didn't show it to anyone. Just folded it back and slid it into his shirt pocket, next to a pair of reading glasses and a small key. Later, Daniel and Frank walked toward the old dock. The aluminum boat bobbed gently, tied loosely as if it had been waiting. Without a word, they stepped in, pushed off, and let the soft current pull them. The lake held the sky like a mirror, broken only by oar strokes and the trail of light lanterns behind them. Frank dipped a hand in the water. "You think it'll last?" he asked. Daniel glanced toward the flickering lodge. "I think we'll work for it." They didn't need to say more. The quiet between them was enough. From the hill, someone shouted, "Gate's working." The sound of hinges rolled across the water like a punctuation mark. And then, gently, it closed, just once, like the end of a book finding its final page. The chill in the air lingered longer now, but the gate at Silver Pines no longer echoed with control, it opened with quiet trust. What had started as a locked door became a turning point, where one family's resolve helped an entire neighborhood reclaim its voice. When power forgets who it serves, it takes only a few steady hands, and shared memory, to reset the course. Like the first crack of ice melting on a lake, truth may begin small, but it clears the surface in time. Perhaps respect really is the key that opens all gates.